Good. Good evening, everyone. Hi there. For those of you who may not know, and I see a lot of familiar faces in the room, my name is Jeff Orris. I'm the Assistant City Manager for the City of Delray Beach. Renee's not in the room. But for those of you who don't know, we're doing a little joint hosted meeting between the city and the CRA. Renee Jodasine, as I'm sure you've all seen, is here. The purpose of this meeting, this is kind of an outshoot from our meeting in May that many of you are at, talking about the disparity study. And there were some misperceptions about what the disparity study does do and what it doesn't do. So we're getting ready to get the draft final report soon. That'll be presented to the commission on March 11th. We have changed the date. Some of you may have heard we were going to do it in February, but we had a need to kind of push it back a little bit. Y'all stole our date for the Robert's Rules. Yeah, it was. We realized that
is March when?
I think we're going to do it March 11th.
Okay, thank you.
So March 11th is when we will have the results of our study. This meeting is not to talk about the results. This meeting is to make sure everybody's clear on what a disparity study is and what the outcome of it can be, and a little bit about how we got to that result, which we did cover in that last public meeting, but that was May, a little while ago. So in the meantime, Renee, thank you. I did say you were here. One of the things that did come from our last meeting is there was concern about the CRA and whether the CRA's information has now been included in the report. They were always kind of, by rules of the state, subject to what we put together. Well, now all of their purchasing information has been included, so they are legally up to speed on joining in on all this. So anything the city decides to do, the CRA is obligated to follow. So there's no concern there any longer. I do have with us tonight Joe Broad from Keene. There he is. Keene Independent Research, who is the firm that is putting this study together. I'm going to ask Joe to give you all just a little overview of what we're talking about. Disparity study, what is it? Why do we need it? How do we go about it? And what the possible results from a disparity study are. Not ours, but a disparity study. When we come up to March 11th, when we present to the commission, that's when you'll hear results and some of the things the city might be able to do. But we don't have that final report yet, so we're not ready to share that with y'all. So I'm going to turn it over to Joe. Joe, why don't you tell us what the disparity study is all about?
All right, will do. Thank you, Jeff. Okay, all, thank you for having me here. It's great to be here virtually, there in spirit. I hope you all can see me and hear me. I can hear Jeff just fine. I assume he has a microphone, but I can't see you. So in case anybody has any questions, get Jeff's attention and he may be able to direct your question to me. Okay, so let's get into it. So my name is Joseph Broad. I'm a PhD in political science. I'm also a co-owner of Keene Independent Research. I've been with the firm for about 5 years doing disparity studies. Keene Independent Research, however, has been doing disparity studies about as long as there have been disparity studies. Dave Keene, the founder of Keene Independent Research, he actually developed the methodology. It's a court-tested and approved methodology in order to provide a basis in evidence for public entities to address observed disparities in contracting with businesses in a marketplace. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about what disparity studies are and how they might be used and some of the constraints around what, say, the city or public entities might do. So to start from the very beginning, the city is interested in leveling the playing field for diverse businesses in the marketplace when it comes to doing business with the city. That is, that the city is collecting tax dollars from the people within its boundaries, and then it's redistributing those tax dollars sometimes in the form of contracts. And the city wants to make sure that that is an equitable process. That is, that all businesses in the area, diverse businesses included, have a fair shot at competing for its public contracts. Now, in order to make meaningful action in pursuit of that goal, that is leveling the playing field for diverse businesses, public bodies have to meet a number of requirements that have been established by the United States federal court system. Now, in particular, the U.S. Supreme Court has established what's called the strict scrutiny standard. There are two prongs to that strict scrutiny standard. The first is compelling government interest. And what this means, compelling governmental interest, it means that a public body has to show that there's actually a basis in evidence that there is a substantial disparity that needs to be addressed. Now, it may be culturally well known, it may be well known inside a public body that there is a disparity, but that doesn't quite go far enough for the court. Instead, what you need is a study like a disparity study to show evidence that there is actually disparity in the number of dollars that are going to minority and women-owned businesses compared to the availability of businesses owned by people of color or by women. The other prong to strict scrutiny standard is the narrowly tailored requirement. And what this requires is for public bodies to establish programs or policies that are meant to address the observed disparities. So the body cannot take a disparity study or cannot take some other type of study that's not a disparity study and then apply race or gender conscious elements in a contract equity program in order to try to address observed disparities. So going way back to when strict scrutiny was established and applied to local government programs with the City of Richmond versus J.A. Crozin's 1989 Supreme Court decision, the court had found that the city's program didn't meet either requirement for strict scrutiny. There was no compelling governmental interest because the city had not established evidence sufficient to show disparities in city contracts. Now, the city had attempted to do this by showing the number of contracts that were awarded to minority and women-owned businesses and compare that against the demographic distribution of people in the marketplace. That is the number of contracts going out from City of Richmond compared to what's the percentage of people of color in City of Richmond. The court took issue with this approach, namely because they didn't gauge who was ready, willing, and able to do business with the city. That is, you can't compare just the population of an area to the share of contracts that are going out to a group, for example. The other issue that the court took with the City of Richmond's program was that it was over-inclusive. That is, it included preference points for businesses owned by Alaskan tribes. And since there were no Alaskan tribes in the City of Richmond on the East Coast, the court decided that this wasn't narrowly tailored, that it was over-inclusive. And so, Keen Independent, we have this court-tested, court-approved methodology that addresses all of the shortcomings that the court had identified in the City of Richmond's program. And we have a really robust and strong methodology in order to provide a basis in evidence for the city, for example, for public bodies to use to respond to and develop a contract equity program. And so what we did was we looked at the city's contract data, we looked at CRA's contract data, and together identified the relevant geographic market area and the relevant types of work to city purchasing. Then we conducted a large availability survey, that is that we called thousands of businesses in Southeast Florida to ask, are you interested in working with public entities in Florida? And if so, what types of work are you able to perform? And with that information, we were able to do a statistical comparison between the contracts that were going to minority and women-owned businesses and the availability of minority and women-owned businesses to do those contracts. We apply some additional statistical methods in order to control for things like the type of work, the role of the contractor, whether it's a prime contract or a subcontract, the year established, the size of the contract, and we weight our results by the dollar amount of the contract. And in that way, we're actually comparing apples to apples. What's the utilization of minority and women-owned businesses? That is, what's the share of city dollars going to businesses owned by people of color and women? And what is the availability of minority and women-owned businesses to do that work? So that way we're not comparing just a list of businesses or even a population to the share of contracts going out to businesses that are owned by people of color or women, but we're actually looking at dollars to dollars. What is the observed utilization of minority and women-owned businesses, and what could have been given a level playing field? And so, with that basis in evidence, without getting into the actual results, but given sufficient evidence that there are disparities to be addressed, public bodies can take certain measures to address those. There are certain steps that a public body can take, like establishing a contract goals program. And what that might look like is a prime contractor might be required to reach out to minority and women-owned businesses in order to meet a pre-established goal of, say, 10% on a contract needs to go to minority and women-owned businesses. And as part of the prime contractor's bid on a large public works contract, for example, they would need to show, here's my plan to reach this 10% goal of minority or women-owned business participation. There are other steps the public bodies can do with this sort of evidence, such as direct outreach. So for small purchases or informal purchases that aren't above the public bidding threshold, a public body might directly reach out to vendors and let them know, hey, we've got this procurement that's available, and the city, for example, or a public body can require in policy that at least one certified MBE or WBE, use the acronyms Minority Business Enterprise or Woman-Owned Business Enterprise, is contacted as part of that outreach effort. One thing to keep in mind about these efforts to address any observed disparities is that they're centered around business ownership. The city can't take measures regarding the racial makeup of businesses, business workforce, unless it conducts a workforce disparity study, which is a different kind of study. You're pulling together different kinds of data from a contract disparity study. You're doing different types of analyses and finding different conclusions. And so the city, for example, can't take the contract disparity study results and then move forward with a workforce program, and vice versa. The city wouldn't have been able to do a workforce disparity study and then move forward with a contract equity program. So the narrow tailoring requirement set forth by the court prevents the city from doing just that, from taking the contract disparity study and applying it to, say, a workforce disparity or equity program. So there are different types of evidence, different types of programs. And we could see this very clearly as Jeff mentioned toward the top of the call. There was a question back in May whether CRA could take part in any program that the city developed as a result of this study. And that was sort of a gray area because at the time we didn't have complete CRA data. And so the basis in evidence wasn't exactly clear for CRA, meaning that if the CRA were to take part in the city program, it's not clear whether it could, because that compelling governmental interest hadn't been clearly established. So
Joe, could I interrupt you for
Jeff.
just a moment?
Sure.
One of the things back then that we did make clear is, though, state statute requires the CRA to follow the city's procurement policies. So if we had implemented something based on the study, they would legally be required to follow it. However, because they were not part of the study, that could have raised some issues. So that's why they have been included since then. So everybody's covered legally based on if there are results and the city commission decides to change the city policy, the CRA is required by statute to follow that same policy. Sorry, Joe. Thank you.
Not at all. No, that was a more succinct and clear way to put that. And so, right, since May, we've collected the rest of the CRA data, and we've updated our analyses to include those data. And now there's no question there. There's no more gray area. And so, as we're wrapping up here, we're in talks about study findings, study recommendations, and the city has already begun some of the recommendations that we've been talking about since the study began. And you're looking at one of the examples here is that the city has already been really engaged in the business community, doing business community outreach and events like this one, as well as a small business expo in 2024.
Which, by the way, we're going to do again this May.
That's great.
Put it on your calendars, May. We'll do a small business expo in which we're really focusing on the minority and women-owned businesses. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. And so finally, just to wrap up once more, to reiterate once more, is that these studies are fundamentally different. They're related to the same topic, that is racial and gender equity. But again, the types of evidence differ substantially. The types of analyses differ substantially, and as do the types of data. And so the city is restricted, is somewhat constrained on the steps that it can take. It has to be anything that the city does in response to the disparity study has to be directly related to the evidence established in the disparity study. And again, that's related to business ownership. That is, who owns 51% or more of the share of a business, and not who the business is hiring. It doesn't have to do with labor. So with that, I hope that helps to clear things up on what a disparity study is and what can be done with a disparity study. And want to pass it back to Jeff.
All right, thanks, Joe. I think Joe said a couple things that are really important based on some of our previous meetings. One is that this is about hiring minority and women-owned businesses, not about who they hire to do the work. So we won't be following up on who their workforce is. It's about the ownership and the money going to the ownership. That's one major important thing everybody needs to know from this. 2, the CRA is fully subject and fully legally backed up now as part of this study and can undertake it. I'm gonna also use, because I know what Renee's gonna say. One of the things that everybody needs to understand when this study comes out, if you take a look at it, you need to understand we put all the numbers together. So if there is a disparity there, it's not necessarily indicative that the CRA hasn't been hiring minority and women-owned businesses, because we put all the numbers together. And the city's going to overwhelm their numbers. So I think what I'm trying to say is don't blame the CRA so much if something's there. They really have done a pretty good job of reaching out to the community. So understand that those numbers are going to skew one way because of what the city does, not so much what the CRA is doing.
I'll just comment too. So we actually asked the consultants.
Renee, if you could
Oh, sorry.
come up to the microphone.
All right. Hi, okay, Renee Jadising, Executive Director of the CRA. So we've actually asked the consultant to include that number because I think it's important to see the difference, because our purchasing is much, much smaller than the city. So I know that a lot of the end of the conversation last time got very, very bogged down essentially with CRA, this, that, or the other. But I think when we see the numbers, it'll be a much smaller amount. Now, some of the large projects like Pompeii, like the Northwest Neighborhood, these big infrastructure projects are funded by the CRA, but we don't own Pompeii. We don't own the streets or roads. We're the funding mechanism for that. So those projects are solely run through the city departments. It's public works, it's purchasing, it's all through the city. So that's why, it was important to delineate what we're actually doing in purchasing and buying and contracting out versus the city, and why I think it's important for that number or percentages to be shown. Because when you hear those big projects, we're actually not the ones who are managing that project. So we have no control over how the purchasing happens, and that for Pompeii and those large projects, the city does. So it's important for the study for the city. So just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you, Renee.
Sure.
So one of the things we'll probably do if a disparity is found and the commission adopts some policies to give any sort of I don't even know how to gauge it. Let's just say a little bit of a leg up to a minority or women-owned businesses. What we would most likely do at the city, instead of hiring somebody here who qualifies we will probably work with the county or FDOT's lists of registered minority and women-owned businesses. So it's important for everybody to understand if we move forward, it would probably be working with those two entities to make sure that a business is certified as minority or women-owned. It won't be the city doing it. That would just take way too much of staff time for the limited program we have. And I think if we used Palm Beach County's list, that should cover anybody who's in our city or anybody locally here. They should have already registered with that department to be working with some other governments. I also want to tell you that some of the recommendations that might come from this, again, if there's a disparity, will be some things we've already been trying to do. Like Joe mentioned, we had our small business expo last year. We're going to do that again. That was really focused on minority-owned business. We used the county's list. We used DOT's list. We used the Office of Purchasing from Broward County. We got just about everybody we could get, and we could get an email for, and we sent them an invitation to come. I'm also going to tell you, when we do that, I'm going to reach out to all of you. Hope you don't mind, because you've signed in. I know who you are. I'm going to ask you to help us find our local businesses and ask them to attend that expo. I think that went over pretty well last year. We used that to introduce the folks who attended to the people, particularly the people who do our small purchases, the ones where, as Joe was alluding to, we have a policy up to a certain limit. We just call 3 people and get a quote. So our hope was through that, and it will continue this year, that our folks who will be attending will have the opportunity to interact with some of the businesses, and the folks for the city who are attending are the ones who make those phone calls to say, hey, could you give us a quick quote? So hopefully they will use the people who show up. They meet them, they understand next time they have a job that those folks might be able to do, put them on the list of people to call. If the disparity does come out, that may be one of the recommendations, that when we do those calls, always make sure there's at least one minority or woman-owned business contacted for a quote. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to get hired. It's still a competition on quote, but they're giving the opportunity if that's one of the things the commission chooses to do. Yes, sir.
I have a question. I'd like to ask Joe.
May I ask you to come up to the microphones just so anybody who may be watching at home can hear you as well? I'm sorry I don't have a roaming microphone. If you would introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Joe, what I would like to know is, having done these studies, comparing cities such as ours here in Del Rey, do you do a follow-up to see, based on your recommendations, how they have made changes in their cities and how it has worked? Do you keep that research, and can we get it?
Sure. So if I understand the question, if I heard you correctly, you're wondering, do we do follow-ups with our past clients just to see, hey, we gave you these recommendations. Did you follow through and implement any programs? And the quick answer to that is, yeah, we do. There's one example that I can think of right now. I can't go into too much detail because basically the report isn't public yet, but we did finish their study, and we remain in contact with them to say, how are things going? We don't just kind of drop the report in their lap and say, good luck with that. We check it back in frequently and ask if they have any questions about the report or implementation of the recommendations.
Are you allowed to let us know some of the other cities that you've done these studies with, or is that information that you don't send out?
Oh, sure. Yeah, we've done these types of studies for cities, counties, states, all over the country. One notable example is the city of Atlanta. They have a really strong contract equity program in Atlanta. We've also worked with the state of Colorado. We are working with the city of Denver in Colorado currently. We've worked with multiple entities in Texas, Louisiana, state DOTs all over the country, so departments of transportation in Arizona, Nevada, really all over the place. I encourage you to check out our website, keenindependent.com. We have a page for our past studies that you can check out examples.
All right, thank you.
Joe, do you show some follow-up on how those cities are doing on your website?
Our website doesn't contain anything about the follow-up or the implementation of our recommendations, so that may require additional research to see what were the recommendations and then what is the entity doing. But for an example in Florida, is you can see we did another study in Florida just down the road from you all, the Broward County Public School System. So we did this study for them last year. And I believe that shortly after the report was published, that they had implemented refinements to their program. So they already had a contract equity program in place, and the court requires that data not be too stale, that is too old to build a program off of. So every few years, a public entity will have to re-examine whether there's still evidence, whether there's still that compelling governmental interest to continue a contract equity program. And so we did that study update for them, where we found that there was a continued need for the program with some refinements. And we also examined, hey, if you didn't operate this contract equity program, what would disparities have looked like? And we found, but for the application of that program, disparities would have been much more extreme. That is, that the program was effective in eliminating observed disparities.
One of the things I would share with you as well is you hear Joe saying Atlanta, public school system, they're really big areas. And you're probably wondering, well, that doesn't really equate to us. One of the things I would tell you is there are not a lot of cities our size that do these studies. Part of it is because one purchase could really skew all the numbers. So if you go looking for what other entities have done, you're usually going to find larger places. You're going to find in South Florida, you're going to find the counties have done it. The school districts have done it. Those sort of places that it's going to be unusual that you're going to find Boca did one or Pompano Beach did one. So we're a little unusual in that realm. So if you're going to look and see how some other programs did, I would start with the larger cities. Yeah, they're not the same of us. Or I had done when we first started getting into a search of city who did a disparity study, did find a couple similar in size to us, but not very many at all. There was one I think it was in Maryland, and another one out west somewhere. There just weren't a lot that equated in size to us. So you're more likely to find that information from the larger
Joe,
cities.
What would be your hopes for our city with this study?
Once we have the results, we'll know what some of the targets might be. Again, one of the things too is what would probably come is setting goals of what we're going to do. We may or may not meet the goals. You never know. Part of it is our reach out. Part of it is how many businesses come forward when we ask. So again, one of those things, if we have something, we put together a program, because I know we have a nice tight-knit community here. And I know one of your great concerns, because I've heard y'all, is that our local businesses get this as well. So if something comes to play, the commission decides to do something. Actually, even if the commission doesn't decide to do something, we'll find a mechanism to make sure that you're aware of what's going on and you can share. And then other people that you reach out to, hopefully they'll jump onto our list, and we'll have more people we can reach out to whenever we're buying something. I think one of the issues we talked about last time, and when we had our small business expo, is that we don't have a lot of our local businesses that are registered as a vendor with the city, which is the number one thing that any business needs to do business with the city. We can't contract with you unless you're registered in our system. So we ask everybody to do that. And I will tell you, one of the things I was very disappointed with our Small Business Expo about, we didn't get a lot of local folks there. We got people from Jupiter, we got people from Boca, we got people from West Palm. We only had a handful who were actually Delray Beach folks. And I'd like to see a lot more participation from our folks. So again, when we come up on that, I'm gonna make sure that we reach out all to you, because we asked who you are and an email address. Hopefully you gave us one that's legible. And we'll share that information. We ask you to share that. If you know a business we should tell, please let us know. We're really trying very hard. We need the community to try with us. So, any other questions? Joe's here to answer questions. What I can answer, I'll answer. What Joe's here to answer, what Renee can answer, we'll do.
You talked about local businesses. I think one of the problems is some of the certifications, different things that you have to have in order to be a vendor with the city. Are there any type of funding or something out there to assist training to assist these minority business in becoming a vendor with the city? Is that right?
So one of the things that we can do, we can move forward with some local educational programs. We also have the Small Business Development Council out of FAU, which has an office at our Chamber of Commerce. That is exactly what they're there to do, is to help small businesses with these types of things. So, yes, Renee.
And I just want to add, you don't have to be a member of the chamber to utilize those services. It's just housed there, but you don't have to be a member of the chamber. I think that's what's important to know. And they're wonderful. They're
And
really,
to take it to a
really
next level, it's absolutely free. They're already
Yes.
subsidized through the U.S.
That is
Small
a-
Business Association.
That is a free service, and like I said, they're housed at the Chamber, which is in the Old School Square garage. So they're right down the street. You can call them up, schedule an appointment, go out and meet with them. They'll help you with any business aspect, writing a business plan, figuring out how to work with governments. Speaking of which, I think one of the ideas that came up this year, and we may implement with our Small Business Expo, is inviting some of our other local governments to come in as well. So we'll expand. Last year, we were very much centered on our city. We may look at what room we have to include some other cities, so it gives everybody a little bit more opportunity to meet people.
You are the best kept secret in town. I didn't know that information.
I'm trying really hard to scream it from the top of my lungs so everybody knows about it.
I'm out there talking.
And if any of you are out on the street and you meet a business person who you have a conversation with about, and they want to know about this stuff, tell them call the city manager's office or call the CRA, and we'll direct them how to get a hold of the Small Business Development Council, how to get a hold of the county's minority business office. We've got that information. We want to share it. There's nothing better than when I get to share other information with people that helps them.
I'll add too. I guess I should. I'll add too. Just another initiative that the city is working on this year is creating what's called, I guess, the Year of Small Business with the Delray Beach Chamber, the DDA, CRA, and the city. But it's really trying to organize information for what's happening for small businesses all throughout the year. So the chamber is right now making a calendar, and you don't have to be a member to access this information, but a calendar that all of us can share to get that information out. So you'll see it in one place instead of having to go to the chamber or maybe the DDA or who knows where, but all of that will be housed in one place. So I just actually got drafts of it recently, so it's going to be going out very soon. So, and for you all, if there's any information that you have about different business opportunities that maybe some organizations that you work with locally are putting on, let us know. I mean, we're trying to find out and make sure it's a comprehensive list, but that is something that we'll be rolling out soon that the city is obviously a big partner in with the Economic Development Department.
One of those, again, if you know an organization or something, share their contact. We'll reach out to them, get their email list. We did that last year with the Small Business Expo. I reached out to the Latin Chamber, the African American Chamber, the Small Business, several women business network groups. If you have a group that caters to a certain group of business, share that with me. I'll reach out to them, get their email address, and make sure that everybody who's in their list is invited to our Small Business Expo. We're trying to get as many people listen, we do it in the gym at Pompeii, that can hold a lot of people. I don't think we'll fill it. So I'd love to fill it. I want to see it filled. But it takes a little bit of effort to reach out, but we are willing to do that effort. We are more than willing to do that effort. We ask for your help with that as well. Yes, Chuck.
I'm an applicant.
Could I trouble you to come up to the mic then?
No, this is a response to Ann. I'm coming up, but this is to Ann and another group that does that is Peach Umbrella Network. You know a little bit about that organization. And then the second thing, when you do your small business expo, I baited last year. I gave you high marks on everything except breakfast. I do know a vendor that can actually do. I do a few vendors that are in Delray that can do breakfast, and we might connect you to them. In fact, a couple of them are here tonight.
And Chuck, let me tell you something. Because after we did that event, I came back and gave staff an earful about why are we going to large national chains for food when we have people right here who could do it.
That's right.
So I'm trying to get us to use the local folks too.
All right.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, sir.
So, Joe, Dwayne Randolph, my question for you is, and I have two questions as well. One is, if in fact the disparity is discovered here in the city, how long would the program hold up? Is that something that's determined by the city, or is that something determined by the results of the study?
If the disparity study shows that there are disparities for minority and woman-owned businesses, the city can adopt a program, and then we would recommend that in about 5 or 6 years after the study is complete, to reevaluate if the program is still required in order to address disparities.
Okay, and my second question is, with the current political climate going, with all that's going on with DEI and that type of thing, do you have any, I guess, what's the word I want to use, whether or not you would foresee that any of that could have a negative or positive effect on this program, given, the current climate of what's going on concerning DEI?
Yeah, I'm sure that you're all aware that we've seen quite a lot of changes recently. But one thing that we can mention, note that I'm not an attorney, and I'm also not a scholar of the courts. But what I can mention is a somewhat hopeful message, and that is that today's court, the makeup of today's court, it had actually upheld the City of Richmond versus J.A. Croson decision. Recently in the Students for Fair Admissions case, which was basically a challenge against Harvard's fair admissions standards that were race and gender conscious, the court had cited J.A. Croson, the Croson decision, as the kind of methodology that universities ought to use if they want to have race and gender conscious elements when it comes to admissions. And so we've seen in the past couple of years the court reverse precedent. That is, it had undone some earlier Supreme Court decision. And that is not so surprising given that the makeup of the court had changed, but it would be very surprising in the next few years to see the same court reverse course on its own precedent. So we are confident that the court has cited J.A. Croson as good case law, and so that's going to remain. The strict scrutiny standard is likely going to remain going forward. With regard to your comments on DEI and what we're seeing from the federal government regarding DEI, from what we've seen so far is that is primarily targeted to federal programs. And so the barring any other Supreme Court decision reversing precedent, the city would not be subject to any of the federal government's requirements that they stop DEI initiatives for federal offices.
Thank you.
So, Dwayne, I can also add to that, when we were moving along last year and the state legislative session had just ended, I reached out to our lobbyist in Tallahassee and said, have you heard anything in Tallahassee that might interfere with this? And his answer was he had not. So from the state side, from the legislative side at the state, we should be okay right now. And of course, then it really comes up to ultimately what the courts do. Right now, there is some measure of inclusion with contracts that have federal dollars. The federal government may decide to make that go away, but that wouldn't change anything we do here locally.
Quick question with regard to that. Is that a commitment that is?
I'm sorry, would you mind coming up? Just need to make sure that Joe can hear you. And I apologize for my sounding very loud. I'm making sure while I'm looking at you, Joe can hear me.
Not an issue whatsoever, just doing your job. Jamal D. Weatherspoon, Delray Beach resident. This isn't a commission meeting, so I don't need to get my address right. This is more so for you. With regard to the city's upholding of specific designation with regard to contractual or business opportunities, is that codified somewhere in writing that we can, go see on the website? Is there a document of some sort?
The commission will adopt a policy.
Okay.
The policy is what we abide by. Now, also remember, a new commission could come in and say, nope, we're not going to do that anymore.
We're just being right now.
So,
we
but
have to-
it'll be there, and it'll be part of those policies that we're required to follow. The city's policies, the general administrative policies, which this would be under, are on the city's website for all the city.
Okay.
So you can come to us and go, hey, you're not following this policy. Why? Take us to task on it.
That is the idea.
Other questions? Chuck's coming up again.
There he is.
I'm Chuck Ridley. I am a longtime resident here in Delray. I think my first question is the process. I've only had a chance to observe the process with other entities, and so the way I observed it, I don't know if this is the process or not. So that's the nexus of my first question. They did the study, and then they had to move to policy. And at that point, it appeared that two things. One, they had to bring in an attorney, or they chose to, I don't know if they had to, bring in an attorney to help establish a policy that would meet scrutiny, particularly of conservative groups, to push against the policy as written. Has that been your experience?
Apologies, is that a question for me or for Jeff?
For you.
Okay, great. So this is a litigious area. These, as I'm sure that most of you in the room are aware, is that race-conscious and gender-conscious programs to ensure a level playing field are often met with, I want to say opponents, or maybe a stronger term than that. And so what that requires on the city's side, or on the public agency's side, who is interested in adopting these program elements in order to make contracts, the contracting process more fair, is that they have to be very careful. The disparity study is the first step toward being very careful. As we've pointed out, when we were talking about the city of Richmond, that was an example where the Supreme Court said this program is unconstitutional, that the city really can't operate this program And so that came to a halt. And so the first thing that the city or other public agencies have to do is do that disparity study to develop the basis in evidence. And then the next step after that is to apply policy that is narrowly tailored to that evidence. And we've supplied some recommendations in order to help the city to do that. But from this step on, after the presentation to the city commission, we are going to be, of course, in talks to check in, but that's going to be then to the city to develop that program. And you're right that it may require input from the city's legal team to make sure that everything does appear to be narrowly tailored to the recommendations in order to mitigate any sort of risk of any opponents to these types of programs from saying that they are unduly or unfairly burdened or discriminated against because of the program.
The second observation was that the public institutions that I saw, phase one appeared to be policies that was race and gender neutral, so that they were able to measure if the disparity was remedied by race and gender neutral policies as opposed to going direct to race and gender specific. Is that your observation of how the process works?
Yeah, and so going back to City of Richmond versus J.A. Croson again, one of the court's critiques of the city's program was that it didn't first consider race-neutral measures. That is, that if they had just a small business enterprise program instead of a race-conscious or gender-conscious program, that they might have been able to address the disparities that way. So based on our recommendations from the first phase of the study and others in the second phase, we have, we believe, addressed that concern of the courts and leave it to the city to take the next steps.
All right. So, at the best case scenario, once the city commission, should the city commission say yes, and should you find disparities, like let's say like that the city of Delray is spending 9 cents on the dollar. I don't know where I got that number from. I think you. If that ain't a disparity, I don't know what is. But let's assume that stays in place. They do it. We got some time before we get to a program that can actually be done. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Now, my next question is to you, Jeff. Jeff, why did the city choose not to bring and include the workforce as a part of this study? What was the thinking that prevented you from doing that?
Honestly, Chuck, I couldn't speak to that. I was not here when this issue was first granulated, so I couldn't tell you why we wouldn't want to go any further with that. It may not be what the commissioners at the time were hearing from the community. You know, I'm sure this is the first time a lot of people are hearing that it would be two different studies and such. So that's all I can do is just speculate.
All right, that's fair. Then, just then for my knowledge of the kinds of procurement, and this is to you and to the elected officials, that the kinds of procurements that make sense is of such large scale that most of the people who happen to be able to take advantage of it can't. Meaning, like you have an $80 million road improvement, I don't know, I think you call it CIP. Of all the businesses that I know, I don't know many people in my neighborhood that is doing stuff on the road. They may be able to do aspects of it. So does this preclude, you said you can't do the workforce, but does this study makes way for the subcontractors? It does.
Yeah,
Okay.
It does. It allows us, if this is the commission's will and there's a disparity, to set targets for subcontracting.
Okay, got it. I think that's it for right now.
He'll be back.
I have a question. The FAU
Would you
that is
please? Sorry to make you get up, but
That's okay.
Joe hears when we speak into the mic.
Oh, this is for you though, or for
Well,
Renee.
I like
For you
when
or
he
for
hears
Renee?
it too, even if I
Okay.
have to answer.
Hey, Joe, I'm Deborah. The FAU group that is located at the chamber. How long have they been there?
They've been there a couple of years now. Do you know exactly when they were?
SBDC.
Well, you should, because you.
Yes, we were funding it. So this program actually started at the library as one of the A-Guide programs. So this has been going on probably before I even got here, at least 2018. They were first at the library. I think Joan Goodrich and Elizabeth had brought this together years ago. They moved over to the chamber, and now they're operating out of the chamber. But I know at least since 2018. They're so basically they're a consultant, regardless if they have the office in Delray or not. The resource is there. What was done pre-me was they wanted a dedicated person for Delray Beach, which is why they were working with the library and the CRA and the city through the Economic Development Department, and then they moved over to the chamber. So without this person being there, that resource would still be available. It just so happens that we have a person that you can call directly in Delray. Otherwise, they have tons of consultants all over that would help anyway. This is just a person for Delray Beach that we started years ago. And she's great. Yeah, she's really very helpful. And if you all want and can communicate with me, I can put you in contact with her through email or phone call or just walking over to the office. She's really, really a really nice person. And has a really good team of consultants.
And most importantly, free. It's a wonderful resource. It's been around a long time, like Renee said. Even if they weren't here, they're still available to the public. But we are lucky enough to have somebody dedicated to our community and housed in our community. So you don't have to drive to FAU or go to Fort Lauderdale or West Palm Beach for that consultation. Other questions?
How many businesses local have they assisted?
Oh, that I couldn't tell you. I don't know. Do you have any idea?
I'm not sure how many.
Not as many as we'd like.
Yeah, but there's been quite a few actually. They have testimonials on their website too, so we can check that out.
Yeah, one of the things I get out of them is they're always happy to help more people. They have plenty of capacity, so it's not a problem to reach out to them and ask for assistance in whatever aspect of business you need. Oh, he's shaking his head.
Just so we can break this down to forever remain broke, local representative from FAU SBDC. Her name was Annette Gray. She was at the first Disparity Study meeting. Her email address is agray2@fau.edu.
Annette is actually not our local rep.
She's
She's
not
one of the
real.
consultants to the SBDC.
She'll still put you in contact with them because that's exactly what they did with me.
Oh, she actually will.
They
Yes, she
will, and they'll walk you through every step of business planning and strategy. They have software. They're pretty solid. Reach out. They're good people. Cool.
Add more.
Add more. Well, I just want to add too. I guess I think what Chuck was saying, how long these things take sometimes. But the city has really good recommendations about things that can be done in the meantime to support small businesses. So even without this getting bogged down with whatever potentially may or may not happen here, I think it's still a great time to really get the small business organized and together so that we know who they are and then we can start reaching out regardless of what the study says. Because I think for one thing that a takeaway here, there's lots of good intentions. I mean, like Jeff said, if there's people that we can call for quotes without going through a hard bid process, which we know, which some of us here are very familiar, gets very onerous and tedious, but up to a certain dollar amount, we can call as staff and just get quotes. So if we have people that we can reach out to that we know from these lists, regardless of who or what they are, we're going to call them and we're going to get this quotes and this information. We just need the people to be ready and come to us. So please, come to the city, come to the CRA, however we can get in contact. It's a great time to let's start doing this. Let's start getting it together because we have a chance now.
Yeah, again, that was kind of the focus of our Small Business Expo. Was for those of you who were there, we had tables on either side of the gym at Pompeii, and we brought the people who make those calls from each department. So it gave all of the businesses in the room the opportunity to meet the people who make the calls. Now again, I can't guarantee they'll make the call, But I do know there were several people who were there on the city side who said, oh, I could use that person. Please do. And we will certainly encourage them. If they came to the expo and put that effort in, want our work, let's try to give it to them. I can't guarantee anybody's going to get work, but it's certainly a great avenue to get yourself on the list and know what's happening. Now, as I also said, vendor registration is the most important thing, because if you're not registered, you will never find out that we have anything available, really. The only time the city works off of that list and hires other people is when a department needs something and we just don't have anybody registered who provides that. In that case, our purchasing department will look through various business directories looking for a business that does that. But that is the only time they will go away from the registered list. And then those people are forced to register before we can consider using them. Oh, how do you register? Thank you. Excellent question, Renee. If you go to the city's website and then go off to the purchasing department page, there's a button right there that says register as a vendor, or some language similar to that. You click it and it's got the form you fill out. It's fairly simple. We're not looking for a whole lot of information because we haven't yet hired you for anything. We basically just want to know who you are and what service or goods you provide, and where you're located, how we get a hold of you. So easy thing. And if anybody has a problem registering, just call our purchasing department and they will help walk you through it. We really are friendly, as long as you ask.
Go to the city's website and do what now?
Go to the city's website, and in departments, you will find purchasing. And it's fairly prominent on their page, although I think it's a little towards the bottom, but it's right there, register as a vendor. Now, one of the things we've taken a look at over time is, as a government, we're required to make sure that any vendor of the city has insurance. But we have tried to be a little bit responsible with, are we asking for too much insurance? Is a small business who's doing a $15,000 job for us, do they need to have $1 million in insurance? So we are willing to look at those things. Our risk, if we have a vendor and they don't see the need, ask, we'll go to our risk management department. We'll say, how do you feel about this? We have reduced some of those requirements in the past, and we will certainly continue to do so if it is appropriate.
Dwayne Randolph again, Joe. I guess this is a question for both. I'll pose it to both you and also to Jeff. In the case where my business is in construction and contracting, and I guess the best example that I can provide, to everybody in the room who probably knows, is the Pompey Park project, where we were, there wasn't a component for minority participation on that particular contract. Fortunately for us, our team was set up in such that way that we were partnering with a majority, a larger contractor, or prime, I would say. And how do you all track those numbers as well in terms of contract? Because the actual contract itself is not written in our name. It's written in the name of the prime contractor. First question is, how are you able to track that? And two, does that become a part of this process once the disparity study is done and implemented, or is that something that has to be tailored specifically by the commission once they do that? And also another question to that before I forget is, Chuck asked a question in regards to subcontracting. Does, in my case, like for instance, if there's $100 million project out there, and in my business, I'm not necessarily a subcontractor or that I do subcontracting work. How would that work in a case where, just like the example I gave with Pompey Park, which is, a $45 million project, whatever it is. And, we were a partner with the prime. How does that get factored in? And does that become a part of what we're talking about once the disparity study is done?
So Joe,
Sure,
this is
go
Joe,
ahead,
I was
Jeff.
going to say, can I take first stab at this?
Absolutely.
My guess would be our policy would probably say if you are not the registered prime, then you would be a sub under our policies. So it would count towards any sub goals that we have, which is probably a good thing because often, here's an interesting concept. I used to work for a consulting firm. It was a woman-owned business. We got a contract in Miami-Dade, which was subject to some of these sub-consulting provisions. They had goals for minority participation and women-owned business. Because we were the prime, we did not meet those goals. We had to bring other minority and women-owned businesses in to meet those goals.
I hear you and I understand. In regards to, because I know you talked about, some stuff that you would follow from other counties, school districts, if you will, and specifically in the case of Pompey Park, we would not actually be a sub. We won't be issued a subcontract. Our contract will be based upon a percentage of, essentially what's received by the prime. So how can that be true if we're not actually a subcontractor per se, or won't be issued a subcontract on that particular project? But the bigger question that I have is does this city have the appetite for that? And I'm talking to the electeds in the room, to make that a part of the actual program, if you will, when the disparity study finally comes to fruition and is made a part. I guess that's a question for either one of you, if you understand what I'm saying.
Joe, what have you seen as far as when there's a partnership, but one firm isn't actually listed as prime, but they're not a subcontractor? Have you seen that situation before?
We have. We've seen that in City of Atlanta. Sorry to keep bringing that up, but part of their program actually includes a joint venture requirement, and that is for certain large public works contracts that the city actually requires large out-of-area businesses to partner and actually create a joint venture with a local certified business. So that's been very successful. But because they have such a mature program, they also have the data to enable firms like Keen Independent Research and other disparity study firms to examine what is the percentage ownership of that joint venture. And so the way that we approached the city's disparity study is 51% ownership. If the 51% is owned by a white male, then they are classified that, and all the dollars going to that business is classified as white male owned.
So here I know in Palm Beach County, and Mr. Alan Gray is sitting in the room. I see him in the back as well. Are you able to speak to any of what I'm saying in terms of what I'm asking? How Palm Beach County does it, because that is a part of their rubric, if you will, in terms of determining how minorities get contracts. And to be quite honest with you, that is where the lion's share of the dollars are actually spent with minority contractors in Palm Beach County. And I would just encourage, the city of Delray to kind of adopt that same sort of policy, if you will, in terms of, how dollars are spent within the community. Because again, not every GC, minority GC like myself, we're a CM. We do CM work with school districts in the county, but on those larger dollar projects, there's that rubric that's put on into the I guess the solicitation, if you will. There's a percentage requirement for that. That's separate and apart from subcontracting. That's more of a statement, but I'm trying to figure out in my mind how to phrase it as a question. I know what I want to say, but it may not necessarily be coming out as right. But do you kind of understand what I'm saying or what I'm asking, Joe?
Yeah, and so one thing I left out of my response before is the reason that it was successful for the city of Atlanta is, and the reason we were able to examine and take into account the percentage ownership and control for that when we did our statistical analyses, is that the city, when they made that requirement that there be, when the city of Atlanta made that requirement that there be these joint ventures, um, is that they also recorded in their data tracking software what was the actual percent of ownership. What was the claim for the certified business on the total? And we need that information specifically. The disparity study consultants, we need that information of what share of the joint venture was a certified business, and then we can account for that in our dollar weighted analyses.
Is
If we
that
don't have access to those data, it's a much harder or impossible task to get at. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, not at all. So your data that you're collecting now does not track that currently between dollars that's being spent with the city and the CRA. The data that
We have
you're
the amount of
collecting.
Yeah, the data that we have is the amount of dollars that we're going to a business, and so if we see that $100 million went to business A, but there's no indication in the data that it was a joint venture, then we're going to look at the ownership of business A, and we're going to classify them according to what it appears that their ownership is. And so if we don't know that 30% of that business is actually owned by say a minority-owned business, a joint venture, then we're not able to control for that. So it all comes down to what information can the city track in its software systems.
Okay. And I would just say to the electors in the room, that is something I think that, definitely works for us in terms of minority businesses. We've done that at the school district level, both at the county level as well, and would hope that you would consider that as part of, your consideration when you're, formulating whatever the program is. Thank you.
Chuck's back. I knew you would be.
So now that Dwayne has set the precedent that we can speak to the electeds. Jeff, you shared that you would use the county's process in terms of certification.
Most likely.
You've been a politician long enough to know to say that. But but the message is that most likely you will not be developing a department within the city. I'm going to ask you, if you're going to do that, consider using more than their list. Also utilize their infrastructure. I mean, you got a resource behind you. If you haven't met Tony Smith, do it, because they do more than just have a list. They do something that Peach Umbrella Network is going to be doing here, as well as their infrastructure and experience. Things like subs not getting paid on time. Things like how to, the bonding process. There's so much more that goes into building the capacity and readying a community for I want to talk about black businesses. I guess there are other small businesses, but that's where my focus typically is, that just don't have the infrastructure, scale, capacity, and too often they don't get the partnerships required to meet that. So please, if you put the program together, put the mechanisms in that allow success up front. Disparity studies, these kinds of businesses. This isn't new, you know that. I don't have to tell you that. I've checked out your resume. All right. Bring that to the front so that it don't need to be politicized. Let's not play games. Let's just do it right for the right reasons up front. You got too many people in Delray that know how to do this. Utilize that infrastructure. That was really to the elected officials I was looking at, Jeff. You think the elected officials heard?
Chuck, one of the things I can say in response to that is, and I'm gonna, we're a small group here, we're all friends, right? I can speak freely. I think we'd be incredibly stupid if we didn't ask the county for more than just their list, but we haven't had those discussions yet. That's why I'm not touting anything more. If this moves forward, certainly we're gonna be having discussions, find out what they can help us with. I'm not trying to recreate the wheel if we're moving forward with anything. They've been doing it a while. We're going to look to them. They know what they're doing.
Good, Jeff.
So let me just speak on.
Please feel free to add in.
This dude bad, y'all. For real, he knows his business.
Alan Gray, Palm Beach County, Office of Youth Business Opportunities. So what Dwayne was talking about, of course, is we have a CM program that we had put in place. We hadn't had that before until this last disparity study. And that kind of helped us get those general contractors as team members as opposed to subcontractors, get that experience up front of how to manage a large program, and also share in those fees that are paid to those prime contractors as well, and not necessarily performing as a subcontractor on that. Now, I think we had little restrictions that we wanted the CM partners not to actually perform as sub. We kind of loosened those reins and let them also perform as subcontractors as well on that particular project. But we saw a really big increase in the number of minority-owned, black-owned general contractors participating as CM partners because it gave them a lot more reign and opportunity to gain experience just besides just working as a trade subcontractor. So of course, that was one of the recommendations by the consultant. So those are one of the many tools and recommendations that they presented to the county, and the county took them up on that offer, and we implemented policy and procedure in order to take advantage of that. So a lot of those things, like you say, you've been doing these for quite some time, and you've worked with the city of Atlanta. So the joint venture is another aspect. We haven't implemented that because we see that the CM partnering is working really well for us. But yeah, joint venturing has been out there for a while as well.
So basically what I can say to that is I came here to make sure that you understood everything, and now I'm learning. Anybody else? Have we exhausted you yet? Yes. I'm willing to stay for another hour if you want, but if you don't have questions, then we probably should let y'all go. Joe, do you have anything you want to add?
I could put everybody to sleep by getting back into strict scrutiny standards.
I think they're indicating you don't have to do that. Renee, is there anything else you want to add? Commissioners, is there anything you would like to say? All right. Well, Joe, thank you very much for the time. Thank you all for coming out. Appreciate your time and your involvement and your questions and helping me get educated as well. The city's available if you have any questions or anything. We're always here. Just call. It's that simple. Thank you so much, everybody.